Hey everyone, it's the Slayer here, and today I'm going to be reviewing the Revenge of the Sith novelization. Um, this is my first time that I've ever read this book. I recently just got the Inkstone limited edition version of the book. It's so pretty. I don't know if you see it. It says the greatest of the Jedi, the greatest of the Sith. It was really nice. I got it. 2 cards signed by Matthew Stover, the author of the story. And the nice thing about this edition of the book is, like, look how beautiful that looks. It says, all knights die, Anakin Skywalker. Oh, all things die, sorry. It's hard to see backwards on the camera. Just really beautiful artwork, concept art inside the book. You know, I mean, I'm sure you've all seen this book now billions of times. But after 20 years of this book being out, I've finally read it for my first time. And as you can see, I've read so many Star Wars books and comics. And when it comes to the movie novelizations, I like to wait for the hardcovers to come out, so I haven't read like Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones. I didn't read The Last Jedi or The Force Awakens, though I did pick up the novelizations for Rise of Skywalker, Solo, Rogue One, which were all really good. Out of the film novelizations I have read, I would say the one that I think left the biggest impact on me was probably Mur Lefree Solo's novelization. I thought a lot of character development and insight into Han, Kira, and especially Enfys Nest, you know, was really a lot more elaborated into the story than what the film showed. So I was really excited to read this one, though, because I've seen so many people talk about this being one of their favorite Star Wars books all time. So going into it, yeah, it's probably now my favorite Star Wars novelization as well. So I'm gonna start off, you know, from the beginning. We'll talk about things I did and then didn't like. You know, it opens up exactly how Revenge of the Sith does, except, you know, we get a little hollow news of what's going on with the war update, and then it jumps right into, you know, Anakin and Obi-Wan. We get a longer scene with them and their starfighters, just really nice. And then we get to see them, you know, a little bit more dealing with the Battle of Coruscant, a little bit more scene with the clones who, you know, are in those other fighters with them, helping them out. It was really cool take to see just in one more time Obi and Annie, you know, last fight of the Clone Wars together. It was really nice. Really good dialogue. Matthew Stover, I have to give him props. He writes Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Padme too, like, just so beautifully. And I just want to also say, I really appreciate how some authors can really detailed explain of what's going on in the dogfight in space. Sometimes I have trouble reading books where there's like battles going on, or especially space battles or air dogfights. Like, it's so hard to understand what's going on in the way writers type what's going on in that scene. So I appreciate how I actually could follow along with Matthew Stover's writing regarding the space battle scenes. You know, he did a little bit different take on some of the sequences. So it was nice for me to just, maybe it's just because of the film and I already know kind of what happens, but I could still picture, I feel like, better in the way he explained things of what was going on in the air or space whenever it regards some type of dogfight. So that was nice. And then I'm gonna set this back down here. And then we get to a scene that I had no idea had ever happened. You know, I had no idea what to expect going into this book. You know, I did see people saying that, you know, get a little bit more scenes and stuff, but we get a scene with Dooku and Palpatine. Sorry, 1 second. Together, on the general's quarters, and it's right before Obi-Wan and Anakin rescue Chancellor Palpatine. You see Palpatine and Dooku, you know, talking before the Jedi come, and you know, they're talking about how this was all pre-planned. Dooku was saying, you know, Dooku was just really reflecting on his part in Palpatine's plan, and you know, he's now having to play the bait to draw Anakin to the dark side, and by doing that, Dooku has to surrender himself. So we know what happens to Dooku in the movie, but what we didn't know was that Palpatine and Dooku had already prearranged that Dooku was supposed to be captured by Anakin, which did not happen. But Dooku was pre-planning that he was going to be captured because that's what Palpatine told him he was going to do. So that way they can get Anakin, who's supposedly the chosen one, well, he is the chosen one, to the dark side. But what Dooku doesn't know is that Palpatine's really wanting Anakin to kill Dooku so he can become Palpatine's new apprentice. You know, it's funny because the way Dooku and Palpatine are having that final conversation together, you know, Dooku's really like, you know, it sucks, like, to have played the villain for so long and now to be captured, you know, it feels like undignified, especially by Kenobi and Skywalker. And Palpatine's like, you know, you got to put your pride aside. This is, you know, for the future of our galaxy. And Dooku, you know, just takes it in and says okay, and then meets his fate. And you know, once he realizes Palpatine turned against him, when he tells Anakin, you know, do it. You know, we get a final glimpse into Dooku's thought, and you know, his thought is, well, it's the way. This is the way of the Sith. It's always treachery, always against each other. And I just thought, like it was such an incredible scene. Matthew Stover wrote that so beautifully. I'm not sure if that scene was supposed to be the film or not, if that was shot. You know, Matthew Stover says this entire story was based off the final shooting script for Revenge of the Sith. So, a lot of these scenes, I'm not sure if I should be thanking Matthew Stover for or George, because I just think it was definitely a collaboration of the two. So, you know, there's that. But moving on next, you know, then Jedi come, kill Dooku. The Chancellor is now realized Anakin's ready to become his apprentice by he killed Dooku. Obi-Wan's down. Anakin's like, you know, let me get my master. You know, in the film, Palpatine's, you know, like, okay, no, leave him. We gotta go. But in the book, you know, Palpatine's a little bit more persistent about it. He's like, no, you need to leave him. Like, we gotta go. Like, he is gonna be dead weight, and we're gonna die because of him. And, you know, you see Anakin's true side of who he really is as a loyal friend who cares about people who care about him. He will do anything for his friends and anyone who he cares about. And I wouldn't necessarily care about, because he's done a lot of selfless things too as a Jedi to help people during the Clone Wars and things like that. You know, he was a remarkable Jedi during the Clone Wars. But it's nice to just see this book really emphasize, again, how humane Anakin is and how passionate and real he is about being there for those who were there for him. And I think that's just an incredible thing to really take in as you're reading the book. Next, they get captured by General Grievous. Matthew Stover said he didn't know about how Grievous's final characterization was going to be because he didn't see the film. All he had was the final shooting script. So in the book, you don't get Grievous coughing, or it doesn't mention him coughing or having a raspy voice. He's just this very imposing cyborg figure, trained by Count Dooku. So that, I think that's some of the fault, or I don't want to say fault, but that's just some kind of the cons of having a book come out, a novelization book come out at the same time as the film, because sometimes these authors don't really have the full scope of what the director / writer envisioned until that final product of the film is released. So I did appreciate Disney had now taken the time to wait a couple months till after the film comes out to release the novelization, so that way the authors have an opportunity to maybe not only read the scripts, but also see the film as the director envisioned it for what it totally is. So that way the author has a complete entirety understanding of how the story really is supposed to go and how characters are really supposed to act, so that way they have, maybe a stronger hand writing that character if they had a lot more background and understanding of the characters. But besides that, the Jedi are captured by Grievous. Grievous, gets away. A nice little part I liked about it too, this one in the book, was that Grievous actually, smashes the Nemenodian's head, the captain. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Nemenodia, the green creatures, who are from the prequels, new gun race species. It was a captain on his dreadnought ship, and it says, at the end, Grievous was just so frustrated with the Jedi creating chaos on the bridge that he just smashes the captain's head open, and it's just he rips his hands off. It's just ugh, dirty Nemenodian slime. And it's just oh my god, it just gives Grievous so much more darker element in that moment, and just makes you realize this guy's kind of ruthless. Dang. Next then the ship crashes into Coruscant. I really thought, as the ship crashes, you have to remember Coruscant had an entire battle over them. So what I appreciate is that Matthew Stover actually took some time to really show, I wouldn't say emphasize, but really just took notice, or made sure you took notice throughout the story, that Coruscant had just had this huge battle over its city. There's destruction, there was death, there was a lot going on. And I felt in the film, it was really just brushed over, as soon as we see Anakin land the General Grievous' dreadnought in Coruscant, you don't see no fire or smoke or any after effects from the Battle of Coruscant and any of the Coruscant shots. The city looks basically clean throughout the entire film. But I like how in the book, Matthew Stover emphasizes a little bit the destruction of the city due to the Battle of Coruscant. And I think that's just really goes to show how good of a writer Matthew Stover is. Maybe shows some George's lack of insight into just some of the deeper stuff, and making sure you're explaining things that I think are important to the audience. Revenge of the Sith is my favorite film, and George is an amazing filmmaker. But I do think this story shows, even in my favorite Star Wars movie, there was a little bit of opportunity for things to be a little bit more emphasized or shown or hinted at. Maybe that's not George's fault. Maybe it's just the time constraint of the film. But even with time constraint, I think you can still take the time to just make sure little things are accurately shown for certain events. You know, I'm not someone who really looks at, I guess you could say, part of me looks at Star Wars, um, like as if I'm a Star Wars historian in the Star Wars universe. I look at events that happen throughout the books and movies, shows, comics, as if as of a Star Wars historian and how those events played out. But just as someone who takes in all this media, you know, I do think, just as that alone, George did have some, you know, missed opportunities in the movie. And I think it's nice that Matthew Stover was able to identify those missed opportunities and really go into detail about them and really emphasize just a lot of things. And I think that was a nice collaboration. A George Lucas story and written by Matthew Stover is such a good collaboration. So next, we get to see, you know, the Chancellor go back to the Senate. We get a little scene of Anakin finding out Padme's pregnant. And I think that's such a nice scene. You know, you're gonna see Anakin's actually the one who hopes that the baby's a girl, and Padme hopes it's a boy. Then, you know, we get to the Jedi Council, and this was a nice scene. So, in this book, you'll see a couple of the meetings of the Jedi Council happening in private versus what we saw in the movie. So, you know, we saw, like, as a scenario, in the movie, we saw Anakin talking about getting his promotion to the council, and we see them then talk about the Battle of Kashyyyk, what's going on over there. But actually, there was a private council meeting right before the actual on the record, you know, council meeting took place, and they had already pre-discussed all that. And I thought that was interesting that we get to see, like, these secret council meetings that are happening that we didn't know about, versus the on the record council meetings. And I think that was just a really cool take, and something I think maybe a future Star Wars writer should explore into a little bit more. You know, I think that'd be an interesting take. So then, you know, the council's like, all right, Dooku's dead. The darkness is still strong. So obviously he's not the main Sith Lord. Now we need to capture Grievous, find out where Sidious is and who he is, and come to find out that the recent encounter Mace Windu had on Coruscant led him to believe that Darth Sidious is someone in the Chancellor's closest circle. So they believe that Palpatine is being manipulated by the Dark Lord of the Sith. So they also realize that Anakin is very close to Palpatine. And it so happens that the Chancellor just took control by a vote of the Senate to take control of the Jedi Council. And none of this I felt like was... I feel like all this was completely skipped over in the movie. Like, I remember the brief scene... We all remember the scene of Anakin in the Chancellor's office and Palpatine being like, you know, Anakin, I'm appointing you to be my personal representative on the Jedi Council. And then he's like, you know, you can't do that. And he's like, I will be taking control over the Jedi Council so that we can end this war faster. And that was it of that. But in the book, you know, it shows the Senate who had to go through a whole voting session to give those powers to the Chancellor. Then we see, you know, and a scene I was completely surprised over. I had thought Anakin was already a member of the Jedi Council and somehow in the Clone Wars. I don't know how I created that thought. I don't know how I thought that, but I thought he had gotten the position on the council within the Clone Wars because he was the chosen one. And, you know, in the film, when him and the council are having a discussion of, you know, Mace goes, you know, you're on this council, but we're not granting you the rank of master. I thought he was just, you know, saying in general, like, you're already on the council, but no, we can't give you the rank of master yet. But I thought he was just saying, the way he said it, it sounded as if Anakin had already been on the council and he should appreciate that, and they're not going to give him the rank of master. What the book actually lets you understand and know is that last day of the Jedi Order is when Anakin was appointed to the council. He was not, elevated through the council. He was appointed to the council by the Supreme Chancellor. And I thought that completely gave me maybe a new, I wouldn't say it makes me look at Anakin in a lesser way, but I definitely think it makes me, just look at it, at that part of him being a Jedi Council member as a different outlook. Not that it's a bad outlook, but it's just, he didn't earn it the way the rest of the members did. But maybe that's because also the council, like the book explains, they feared his power, and that's why they weren't giving him the rank of master. So, yes, technically, he probably should have been on the council because of his abilities, his strength, his intellect, all of it. But they were scared of all that, so that's why they didn't even give him a master position. And they had to let him on the council because the Chancellor has control over the Jedi Council on the last day of the Republic. So then, what I would say I was a little surprised about is the whole Kashyyyk sequence with Yoda was skipped over. I thought maybe we would see, Yoda trying to... I mean, I guess, we didn't even get Chewbacca in the film, nothing with the Wookiees. I thought maybe, that would be touched upon, but it wasn't. We didn't even get to see Master Plo Koon, Kiara Mande's death, Stacia Lee's death. All that was shown in film that wasn't in the book. It was completely skipped over. But what we did get, I guess, maybe was a little cooler. I don't maybe say cooler, but because not much happened. But basically, we get the same old Palpatine's trying to, slowly but surely convince Anakin to join him. First by appointing him to the High Jedi Council. Then he asks him to be with him when he has to deal with the delegation of 2000. And yes, we got those deleted scenes, but even Matthew Stover really emphasized and expanded those deleted scenes, which I really appreciated. So we got, the scenes of Bail Organa's office when they first talk about it. Then we get the expanded scene with Padme in her apartment. Then we get the expanded scene of this delegation of 2000 going to Palpatine's office. So there was really a lot of interesting stuff with the politics. We lost some stuff that was in the film that wasn't in the book, but we also gained so much more insight into the bigger picture of what was going on with the Republic and everyone during that movie that was just briefly touched upon in the film. So, Anakin, meets the Chancellor at the Opera House, one of our favorite scenes. And it's nice that it was interesting to see Palpatine use Plagueis' name a little bit more in this book than, the film only mentions Plagueis once, and just really emphasizing how Plagueis was able to manipulate midichlorians to create life after death or maintain life so that they don't die. It was really interesting. And then we get to see, Anakin really being obsessed with the knowledge of how to get this power that Darth Plagueis had. Then Palpatine tells him, in another scene, well, you can only learn this power from me, and that's when Anakin's like, oh my god, you're the Sith. But what was really nice right before that is Palpatine, how was telling Anakin, the Jedi Council want you to spy on me, don't they? That, and Anakin obviously is like, realizes, yeah, like he knows that that's what they want me to do. And Anakin's like, they think the Sith Lord has infiltrated your inner circle, and then Palpatine's like, if the Dark Lord was to walk through my office doors right now, I wouldn't want to kill him. I wouldn't want to ask him how he could help in this war. And I think that definitely really stuck in Anakin's mind, because that same line is brought up again later in the book. When after Anakin, finds out Palpatine's the Sith Lord, he goes tells Master Windu, CC-10, Kit Fisto, and Agent Kohler. They, go see the Chancellor. And it was really nice. I liked right before they go, Kit Fisto was like, oh, is Master Yoda coming? Like, I really miss Master Yoda's coming, because I just don't know if we're enough Jedi to do this. And then, I think it was CC-10, and he's like, we'll have to be enough. And I think that was just a really nice, and I never really thought about, what was going on in those Jedi's minds right before they went, but it was nice. And they're telling you this book, it does different spin on some of the sequences, and the most amazing scene happens, the Jedi show up, and CC-10 is just talking to the Chancellor, and Chancellor Palpatine is just like, what do you... He starts recording so everyone can see it. Basically the Jedi, you're under arrest. Well, the whole scene. Palpatine's like, this is treason. And then the transmission cuts off for all the Republican citizens to see. Republic citizens to see. Then you get to just the conversation Palpatine is having with those Jedi. And CC-10 is just like, Chancellor, just come on. And then Palpatine's like, CC-10, you of all Jedi know how, how nice I am and how good I am. And then all of a sudden, bam! Gets taken out by Sidious first. And then Agent Kohler gets stabbed. He's down. Then you have Kit Fisto and Master Windu fighting. They're fighting. And then you cut to Anakin, coming to save them. And then, even in his mind, I don't think up until the moment he confronts Palpatine and Windu, I really don't think he was planning on turning against the Jedi. I really don't. But it's so cool, because, it shows the scene of Anakin walking through the office, seeing, the fight that's just transpired. And he sees Kit Fisto's head on the Chancellor's desk. And it gives me, a flashback of the Acolyte almost, of when all those Jedi are being killed. And you see, Jackie being stabbed in 3, and I don't know, that kind of just reminded me of how gruesome that was, and it's all similar. So then, Anakin, cuts off Windu's hand. Windu's thrown out the window by lightning. And I thought maybe there'd be a little bit more explanation to Windu if he died really or not. This book would really, solidify that, but it didn't. It just says, Windu's world went dark as he went flying out the window. That's it. So, who knows? That's an open window still. And then it was really cool, because there's this Jedi doorman, I want to call him, a gatekeeper, the gatekeeper. He's in charge of holding down the fort, because as soon as the Jedi heard that General Grievous was destroyed, the temple went on lockdown to make sure that the Chancellor surrenders his powers back to the Senate. So the Jedi were already preparing for something just in case something was about to go down. But I don't think they expected the entire temple to be taken down by their own forces, because then once Anakin becomes Vader, Palpatine destroyed the Jedi temple, and this doorkeeper just sees the temple's on lockdown, and he's in charge of the doors. He sees, Anakin coming alone, But then he also sees an entire battalion of the 501st right behind him. And he's like, what, Master Skywalker, what's going on? And bam, Anakin just kills him. Before Anakin kills him, Anakin's like, where's Shakti? And he's like, she's meditating. And then he kills him. And he goes after Shakti because she's the only Jedi Council member left at the temple, I believe. Because, yeah. Then we don't get no other scene with the Jedi Temple being destroyed or no battle. I was really hoping we'd get, see Anakin facing some Jedi we would know. Nothing. So I was really disappointed. Not only did we see that on film, we didn't see it in the book. I think it would have been really cool to see some Jedi fighting Anakin that we know. But that's just my personal pick. So, then you have the whole Galactic Empire creation. And I liked in the book that they emphasized it as Empire Day when it's announced that the Republic's being transformed into the Republic. And he says, this will be a day we will celebrate Empire Day. And I really like that now it makes sense. Rebels, when they had that whole episode of Empire Day, that they took that from the book. So I really like that. Then we get Obi-Wan facing Anakin finally. This moment where Padme's so vulnerable, so sad, so heartbroken of, what she's heard from Obi-Wan and what she's seen at the temple, that, she just wants Anakin and her to run away from all of these problems and just be alone and start the family. But Anakin's so blind and so consumed by greed and the hunger of power that all he sees is Padme's betrayal because Obi-Wan's on her ship and he thinks that she brought him to Mustafar to kill him. So in his moment of anger, hatred, doubt, fear, he could not see the reality of what he had and what he had basically given up. And he went, kiss Padme and then fights Obi-Wan. And then I like the scene of this book takes a little bit of a different take of Sidious and Yoda. They have a nice little dialogue that's different from the film, and instead of the lightsaber they jump into, we get them just using lightning against each other. Well, Palpatine using his lightning, Yoda deflecting it, but they just do that for a little bit before they actually get into the saber fight. I didn't realize how quickly this most of the book actually is filled with the Battle of Coruscant, quite a bit of the political stuff with the senators, the chancellor, the Jedi Temple. Well, not Jedi Temple, but the Jedi and the Jedi Council. I would say those three things took up most of the book, and then we'll just going into the details of it all, which is appreciated, but that's what took up most of the book. So there wasn't no scenes of, like I said, any more extended scenes of Order 66 in the temple. We didn't get to see Kashyyyk. It was only mentioned briefly. We didn't get to see Chewbacca. We didn't get to see... we didn't get to see Plo Koon, Kiara Mande, Stacey Ali's death, like I was mentioning. What else didn't we get to see? There's just quite a bit of stuff like that we just didn't get to see. And, once Order 66 happened, we were basically 75% done with the book. And we basically had 35% of it was the Mustafar battle, Palpatine and Yoda battle, the Palpatine giving birth to the twins, Darth Vader being born, um, the new families that the twins would go to. And I feel like even, there's still quite a bit going on with all that, but I feel like a lot of stuff was skipped or just brushed over that. Yeah, no, we can't have everything, but, it's still hard not to want to see more and more with such a great story. I would have been okay if this book was, the book is 13, 14 hours, but Trials of the Jedi is the longest one, or actually the longest book, Star Wars canon book, is the Return of the Jedi point of view book, which is pretty close to 30 hours, if not more, I believe. So I would have no problem with them turning Revenge of the Sith into a 30-hour novel. I mean, I would read it. But yeah, like I just said, all those last moment things were all briefly brushed over. It was nice to see Yoda, though, have his scene with Qui-Gon. And we got to see Qui-Gon talk to Yoda for a little bit. And, this book solidified that Qui-Gon, one of Yoda's teachers was Qui-Gon, and one of Qui-Gon's apprentices, well, Qui-Gon had a Padawan and an apprentice. His apprentice was Yoda. And I noticed that word was specifically used for Yoda and Qui-Gon's relationship. And that word is usually used for Sith. The Jedi always refer to it as Padawan, though maybe Yoda just doesn't see himself as a Padawan because he's so old and wise. So I guess apprentice maybe would be a little bit more mature and appropriate word. But I thought that was I took note of that the word apprentice was used instead of Padawan, or as I don't know what you would want to call it. But yeah, I mean, it was a good book. I enjoyed it. No, I loved it. This book definitely got a 10 out of 10 for me. It was really cool just getting to see way more of Palpatine's thoughts. Anakin, Obi-Wan's, Padme's, just everyone's thoughts more inside of their minds. It was so nice to see so many scenes be extended in this book. So many scenes that weren't in this book that we got to see. So many, moments that weren't even in the story, like these little quotes and stuff that Matthew wrote throughout a couple of the... there's 3 sections to this book, and for each section he wrote these really nice little quotes that I think are really powerful. So he's just a masterful writer, storyteller. So that was my review for Revenge of the Sith. Please, look forward and keep a lookout for another review coming soon. I'm going to be reading Masters of Evil. So that will be... I'm waiting for my order from Inkstone for that. So that should be coming out soon. But as always, may the Force be with you. Bye.